There is a question spreading across America right now that no one in the Trump White House wants to answer. It is a question being asked by grieving mothers, by veterans, and by ordinary Americans watching the news with a feeling they cannot quite name, something between rage and heartbreak. The question is simple. If this war is so necessary, if it is so justified, if it is truly worth the blood of America's sons and daughters, then why is Barron Trump safe and sound in New York City while other people's children are coming home in flag-draped coffins? That is the question. And today we are going to answer it fully, honestly, and without flinching. Before we discuss Barron Trump, Melania Trump, and the profound hypocrisy at the heart of this story, we must first understand the human cost of what is happening on the ground. On February 28, 2026, the United States, under Donald Trump's direct order, launched military strikes against Iran in an operation called Operation Epic Fury. Within days, American soldiers were dying. Not in some abstract, distant sense. Real Americans with names and families and entire futures ahead of them were dying in a war that Congress never formally authorized and that a majority of the American public, according to multiple polls, does not support. Among the first to fall were Army Reserve Captain Cody, 35 years old, from Winter Haven, Florida. Army Reserve Sergeant First Class Noah Teachins, 42 years old, from Bellevue, Nebraska. Army Reserve Sergeant First Class Nola Moore, 39 years old, from White Bear Lake, Minnesota. And Army Reserve Sergeant Declan Cody, just 20 years old, from West Des Moines, Iowa. They were killed on March 1, 2026, at the Port of Shuwaikh in Kuwait by a drone strike. These were not statistics. These were people. Somebody's children, somebody's parents, somebody's closest friend. And what did Donald Trump, the man who sent them there, say when asked about their deaths? He told NBC News, "We have 3, but we expect casualties, but in the end it's going to be a great deal for the world." He then posted a video on social media and added, "Sadly, there will likely be more before it ends. That's the way it is." That is how the Commander-in-Chief of the United States military spoke about the men and women dying in his war. Not with grief, not with solemnity, not with the weight that the moment demanded, with a shrug, with a cost-benefit calculation, with the casual indifference of a man who has never once in his life faced the consequence of sending other people's children into harm's way. And this brings us to the central wound of this entire story. Because while Declan Cody, 20 years old, the exact same age as Barron Trump, was dying in Kuwait, Barron Trump was in New York City, attending university, living his life, safe, protected, and untouched by the war his father started. There is something deeply morally troubling about that picture, not because Barron Trump as an individual owes anyone military service, not because we should ever wish harm upon any young person, but because of what his safety reveals about the man who is his father, because of the vast and unconscionable gap between the lives of those who hold power in this country and those who do not. This is the hypocrisy that America is waking up to, and it is why within days of the first American casualties, a hashtag began trending across social media, "Send Barron." 2 words, no punctuation needed. The message was clear. If this war matters enough to send Sergeant Declan Cody, if it matters enough to send young men and women from Minnesota and Nebraska and Iowa and Florida, then it matters enough to send the president's son. That is the argument, and the Trump White House has no answer for it, because there is no answer, because the argument is correct. Jesse Ventura, former Navy SEAL, former professional wrestler, and former governor of Minnesota, appeared on Piers Morgan and said what millions of Americans were already thinking. He said, "How can you send somebody else's kids to a war if you won't send your own? A war is justified if you're willing to send your kids." He called on Barron directly, saying, "Come on, Trumps, don't just reap the benefits of this free world. Somebody put on the uniform, and that's you, Barron." And then he turned to Donald Trump and said simply, "Do something your father didn't have the patriotism to do." That word lands like a hammer. Patriotism. Because this is a family that wraps itself in the flag at every available opportunity.
This is a man who stands before crowds and embraces the American flag like it is a stage prop. This is an administration that uses the language of strength, sacrifice, and national honor to justify a war that is already costing lives and has no clear end in sight. And yet, when it comes to the most basic expression of that patriotism, when it comes to putting your own family in harm's way the same way you are asking other families to do, the answer is silence. The answer is New York. The answer is Barron Trump safe in his apartment while someone else's 20-year-old dies in Kuwait. A website called draftbarrontrump.com was created on February 28th, the very day the strikes on Iran began. It went viral almost instantly. And what is remarkable is not simply that it exists, it is what its creators understood about this moment. They understood that the most powerful political statement is not a speech, not an advertisement, not a policy paper, is a mirror. All they did was hold up a mirror to the Trump family's patriotism and asked, is this real? Does this apply to you? Or is sacrifice, like everything else in Donald Trump's world, something that other people do? Now let us turn to Melania Trump, because she is not a bystander in this story. Multiple reports have confirmed that Melania is, in the words of people close to the family, completely in charge of Barron's life. She has always been fiercely protective of her son, keeping him from the public eye, shielding him from scrutiny in ways that, honestly, most parents would understand and even admire. But here is what must be said plainly. Melania Trump's fierce protection of Barron is the exact same instinct that every mother feels when her child is in danger. The same instinct that Declan Cody's mother felt, the same instinct that every military family in America carries with them every single day. The only difference is power. Melania Trump has the resources, the connections, and the political insulation to ensure that her child is never placed in the position that other people's children are placed in by her husband's decisions. And she uses that power. Of course she does. Any mother would. But the question that hangs over all of this is this. If you have that power, if you use it to protect your own child, then how do you justify being part of an administration that sends other people's children to die? We must also be honest about Donald Trump's own history with military service, because it is essential context. Trump did not serve when his country was at war in Vietnam. He received 5 draft deferments, 4 for college and 1 for bone spurs in his feet. Former Chief of Staff John Kelly, a Gold Star father whose own son was killed in Afghanistan, has said publicly that Trump called fallen soldiers suckers and losers. Trump has referred to traumatic brain injuries suffered by soldiers as headaches. He has suggested that the Civilian Medal of Freedom is superior to the Military Medal of Honor because recipients of the military honor are often, in his words, in very bad shape. This is the man now sending other people's children to war in Iran. This is the man for whom sacrifice has always been something that happens to other people. And making it even harder to sit with, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth stood at a Pentagon podium and criticized the media for covering the deaths of American soldiers too prominently. He suggested the press was only trying to make the president look bad. The Secretary of Defense of the United States told reporters they were paying too much attention to the deaths of American service members, as if those deaths were an inconvenience, as if Sergeant Cody's 20-year-old life was a public relations problem to be managed. 13 American service members have now been killed in this war. The number will grow. Trump himself has said so. That's the way it is. That is the way it is for everyone except the Trump family. We need to be honest about something uncomfortable. The argument being made by Ventura, by the people behind draftbarrontrump.com, by millions of Americans sharing that hashtag, is not really about Barron. Barron Trump is a young man who did not choose his father or his circumstances. He did not ask to be born into this family. He did not create this war. The point is not Barron. The point is the principle. The point is that a man who sends other people's children to die should be willing to answer one question: would you send yours? And if the answer is no, if the answer is that your child is somehow more valuable, more worth preserving than the children of the people who vote for you, then what does that tell us about everything else you claim to stand for? It tells us the truth, the uncomfortable, unavoidable truth, that power in America has always worked the same way. that the people who make decisions about war are rarely the people who fight them, that the flag-waving and the strongman posturing and the talk of sacrifice and honor is, for those at the top, almost always just talk, that the gap between those who hold power and those who pay its price is not a flaw in the system, it is the system. Sergeant Declan Cody was 20 years old. He died in Kuwait while Barron Trump was in New York City. His mother will spend the rest of her life with a folded flag and an absence where her son used to be. And the man who sent her son to die called it a great deal for the world. America is asking a question. It deserves an answer. And the silence from the White House, from Melania's carefully managed public image, from a family that has built an empire on the idea that they represent the forgotten working people of this country, that silence is the loudest answer of all.